Hello and welcome to the Feeling Good podcast. I am your host, Fabrice Nye, and joining me here in the Murrieta studios is Dr. David Burns. Hi, David.
Hi, Fabrice.
Dr. David Burns has been a pioneer in the development of cognitive therapy, and he is the creator of the new team therapy. He is the author of Feeling Good, which has sold over 5 million copies in the United States and has been translated into over 20 languages. He is an emeritus adjunct clinical professor of psychiatry at the Stanford University School of Medicine. Welcome to episode 130 of the Feeling Good podcast. Today we will talk about fractal psychotherapy, and we'll explain in a moment what we mean by that. But today, besides David and I, we have another guest on our show, Rhonda Borowski, who was also part of our episode last week, because she's becoming a fixture. Rhonda will help us with some of our role plays today. Hi, Rhonda.
Hi. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm extremely honored to be a part of this podcast. You asked me to introduce myself. I started off as a social worker, and I'm now a clinical and forensic psychologist. I have a private practice in Walnut Creek, California, and I'm a level 4 certified team CBT therapist.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
So should we dive in here?
I was about to, David.
Oh, go right ahead. Go right ahead.
So what we're talking about today is what is very important in your model, David. It's specificity. And, we've titled this Fractal Psychotherapy because in a fractal, which is a mathematical and geometric figure, if you zoom in on a fractal, you start seeing the same patterns repeating themselves. The smaller and the smaller the zooming gets. I like to call this holographic psychotherapy because in the hologram, if you break your hologram in small pieces, each piece has the entire image on it.
Is that right? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
How many tiny little pieces are there? Like billions?
Well, you can make as many as you want. The only thing is that in a hologram, the smaller the piece, the lower the definition.
I see.
But it's like shrinking a 10,000 pixel image to 200. But you still get the same image.
Yeah. The term fractal psychotherapy probably sounds overly intellectual, and I never thought of including it in a podcast, thinking it would be kind of boring or turn people off. And then I realized it's tremendously practical and tremendously
people
exciting.
Like fractals. They're beautiful. It's like
a fractal is a little
ferns. They are like fractals.
Yeah, you can. I first learned about it. There was someone had a computer that had a fractal program on it, and you can program in a little equation that would be kind of at the 4th grade or 3rd grade level, something just a simple equation with 2 or 3 terms in it, and then it repeats itself over and over again, and you can create a beautiful multicolor parrot or a complex, beautiful, gorgeous landscape. You can replicate in absolute detail the East Coast of the United States using this procedure, and you get these complex patterns that actually expand instantly to the size of the universe. Even on your computer, they do that. The screen isn't big enough to see it all, but it expands infinitely. But if you zero in on one tiny little piece of that parrot or one tiny little piece of that landscape, as you were saying, it always comes down to the same exact tiny little thing that's being repeated over and over again. It's kind of magical. And it occurred to me that's actually how team CBT works, because one of the key pieces in team, whether you're working with a depressed patient, someone with an anxiety disorder, someone with a relationship problem, or someone with a habit and addiction, after we do empathy and after we eliminate the patient's resistance to change, and we're ready to change the person, we ask them to zero in on one 5-second moment when they were upset. And in that 5-second moment, you can gain complete understanding of the patient's problem. You don't need to go into their past and into their childhood. Just how were you thinking and feeling at one brief moment? All the suffering is encapsulated there. And then when you show the person how to change at that one brief moment, they'll understand the solution to all of their problems in that domain. And
So
the first time...
The question is why? Because people are going to wonder, how can one very specific and unique and very short situation can generalize to the entirety of their life?
Yes, well, that's a great question. Then I'll answer that, and then I want to tell you how I got into this thing in the first place, which was kind of weird. But it's because let's say you're depressed and you're beating up on yourself because you've been rejected or had a failure or you're not performing up to speed. You'll have a way of being very self-critical and beating up on yourself, which is the exact thing that you do to yourself every time you get upset. It's just that one moment gets repeated over and over again. Once you understand what was going on in that 1, 2, or 3 or 4 second moment when you were upset, you'll have an understanding of all of your problems, because it's never anything other than the same thing repeating itself over and over again. And so
yeah, that's the thing. We don't have a lot of imagination when it comes to beating ourselves up.
Yes, although we do it in different ways, so we don't notice it's the same thing over and over again. The way I learned about this first, I was walking down Lancaster Avenue in Bryn Mawr, which is the main drag of Bryn Mawr, California. We lived about 3 miles from there in Gladwin when we were in Philadelphia. And it's just, it has stores and stuff and clothing store or whatever. And I don't remember, I was walking toward my car or something, and this young man came up and started talking to me, just kind of real spontaneously. And I didn't know who he was or anything. And he told me that, he was hoping one day to become a motivational speaker. And he also said that he was into to Buddhism. And he says, something I really want you to know. I mean, he didn't know who I was. I didn't know who he was. It was just like this weird conversation between strangers. But he said that the Buddha said that we keep dying and getting reincarnated hundreds of times, thousands of times. And that if you could just change yourself for one or 2 second moment of your life, that you would achieve enlightenment. But it takes thousands of reincarnations to do this. And that once you just change one thing about yourself for one brief moment, then you'll get enlightened. But he said, and then the other odd thing about it is that since the universe is one, the entire universe will achieve enlightenment at that same moment. And I was thinking, gosh, that's the most rubbishy, stupid thing I ever heard. I didn't say this, but I was just thinking, this is so nonsensical, it makes no sense. And then when I started thinking about my clinical work, I realized that in that context, I can understand it very, very well, because when my patients recover, it's by focusing on one specific moment when they were upset or in conflict with a loved one or having a panic attack. And when they understand what's going on at that one brief moment, they get an understanding of all of their problems. And when they change, they do not only have their symptoms disappear, they do go into enlightenment. And the cool thing about it is everyone you interact with will go into enlightenment at the same time. Like if you suddenly change your way of relating to people, you'll suddenly have a new reality in the way you experience everyone. Or if you've been depressed and you suddenly have joy, that joy will radiate to the people you interact with. Well, it probably sounds like vague, abstract BS at the moment, but we can kind of bring this to life with a couple of examples.
Yeah, and by the way, I've heard that saying about enlightenment, where getting enlightened is really what you do for the entire universe.
Does it make sense to you?
Well, we won't discuss the spiritual meaning of that on the episode, but at a personal level, yes, it's true that our universe is really through our perception. And if we change the way we perceive, through questioning our thinking, then we'll change our entire universe.
Yeah, that's cool. It really is a practical thing. And I might say also the reason I want to have this podcast is because this is radically different from the way I was trained. and radically different from the way most psychotherapy works, where I was trained, the patient comes in, you just listen, and there's this general BS that goes on for months or years where they talk and you say, tell me more about that. And you never zero in on that one specific moment and use tools to help the person change at that one specific moment. And even today, I think most psychotherapists, they kind of like to schmooze behind closed doors and have what they fancy to be this emotional corrective experience. If you come and talk to me and we relate every week, some good thing is supposed to emerge from that. And while that might sometimes be true, I don't think it often is particularly true that something wonderful emerges from that. And certainly when I'm working with someone, I want to bring about complete recovery in today's session right away by focusing in on one moment of that person's life and changing the way they're thinking and feeling and relating to other people at that moment.
Yeah.
So you just said that when you're working with the patient and you want to work on one specific moment in time when they were really upset. And, I know that you've said before, and what I read in the ebook is that when you ask them to come up with one specific moment in time, sometimes they become upset because they don't want to work on one specific moment or one problem. They want to work on their whole life and all of their problems.
Yeah, and I've often called this the Hourglass Effect, that when the patients come in, they have all of these problems, all of these examples of these problems, and they do need to vent, and that's why empathy is an important part of Team CBT, to skillfully encourage the client to talk, and don't try to help them, just let them get all those feelings out. But then I tell them at some point we want to converge that hourglass down to the narrow part of the hourglass and focus on just one moment when you're upset. And then we'll come out the other end of the hourglass and you'll see the solution to all of these problems. Also, and I've mentioned this on podcasts before, I believe, at the beginning of therapy, I have all my patients fill out a memo I created in, I think, 1984, called the concept of self-help memo. And it tells the patient that while talking can help, and some people might need a medication, if they're severely disturbed, and all those things will be a part of the therapy. If they need a medication, we'll give it to them. Fortunately, most patients can be treated now without medications, but the real secret is to learn tools to change your life. And we're going to be using tools in session, and you're going to be having to do psychotherapy homework to learn how to use those tools between sessions. And then if the patient isn't looking for that type of therapy, they're free to go to another therapist. I believe in free will and accountability, both. So there's a little negotiation involved with the patient to make sure they want, what you're offering.
So I have an example from this is a question that someone wrote for the Feeling Good podcast.
Now, this is a woman who I'm going to call Sophia, and she graciously gave me a fabulous example of how a fractal psychotherapy or Team CBT would work. This woman, "Hi, David, I recently found your books and podcasts, and they have radically changed for the better the way I see the world. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. May I ask you a question? I wondered if you have any opinion of experience of using your techniques with people with Asperger's, high-functioning autistic spectrum condition." Now, right away, notice she wants to go on to a general level. We want some general way to deal with people with Asperger's. And notice, too, since she's talking about her husband, she's doing what almost everyone does almost all the time, is saying, I'm having a problem in my marriage, and it's my husband's fault,
right?
Really. And my husband has this condition and has suffered depression most of his life, and he's been in an acute bout for the past 2 years, which is proving very difficult to treat. And I'm so sorry, Sophia, that your husband is struggling in that way. He's intellectually gifted and can mask his condition well. He says thinking or talking about emotions or personal issues makes him anxious to the point of nausea. He says he either can't verbalize what's going on in his head or he just doesn't know. Even at his lowest, he would answer fine when I asked him how he was feeling. He won't initiate conversations about emotions or relationship issues. And so she's saying that she read my book, Feeling Good Together, and wrote him a letter using the 5 secrets, confessing that she finds it hard to be honest about her emotions and that she hadn't done a great job of supporting him, and she apologized to him, and he said he appreciated my honesty, but he has said nothing else about the letter. And so she's asking for help. And then I emailed her back and asked her to give an example. Like, what I really want to know is one brief moment in your interaction, Sophia, with your husband. And all I really need to know is one thing he said to you and exactly what you said next. And then when you analyze that, we'll understand all the cause of the problems in your marriage. And we'll also, when we solve it, you'll understand the solution to all the problems in your marriage or any problem you ever have with anyone. So. And
did she believe you? Just one brief conversation would help her?
Well, I'm telling our audience that
because it sounds so amazing and spectacular.
Yeah, it is an amazing thing, and it seems hard to believe. And if I hadn't understood it when I first talked to this young man on the streets of Bryn Mawr, it sounded nonsensical. But why don't we dive into her example? I didn't spell that out, although it is spelled out to a certain extent. Fairly clearly in my book, Feeling Good Together. But again, people read the book and a lot goes in one ear and out the other. I try to make these things super clear.
Yeah.
But
that's one of my favorite books that you've written, actually. I love that book.
Thank you. And my daughter, Senia, helped edit that, and so she was a good editor, and so it's an easy read.
Yeah, I love it, actually.
So anyway, in the relationship journal, Sophia's husband, she's doing steps 1 and step 2, and then you and I, Rhonda, can do steps 3 and 4 and 5. But the husband said, I don't really know why I'm feeling so depressed today. And then Sophia responded, do you feel worse than you did last week? Did something happen? I read a self-help blog that said people can feel worse in the winter because there's less daylight. Maybe you have SAD or seasonal affective disorder. So that was her response. Now keep in mind, Sophia's complaint is my husband can't deal with his feelings.
Right.
Now, I had also asked her on the relationship journal to circle the emotions that she thought he was having. And you can see here that she circled that she thought he was feeling depressed, unhappy, nervous, frightened, ashamed. These are in different categories, by the way. There's 9 categories. I'm not mentioning the categories, just the emotions she circled. And she thought in the inferior category, he's probably feeling worthless, inadequate, defective, and incompetent. And then in the alone category, she thinks he's feeling unloved, rejected, abandoned. Also, he may be feeling foolish, humiliated, and self-conscious. And that he's also feeling discouraged and despairing, she thinks. And he's probably feeling stuck and maybe in the anger category, resentful, annoyed, and irritated. So 2, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 21 of emotions that she imagines he's might be having or is probably having. And then her feelings, how was she feeling during this exchange, was she circled unhappy, worried, unloved, inadequate, unwanted, rejected, alone, despairing, stuck, thwarted, resentful, annoyed, irritated, and furious. So she's got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14 feelings. Now, we've got our fractal, and the argument is that all the problems in this relationship can be encapsulated here. And that when she comes to understand what's going on in this exchange, she'll understand the problem between her and her husband. In addition, the enlightenment piece, which is painful, is that we create our own interpersonal reality at every moment of every day. And the relationship journal is a tool to bring you enlightenment, to help you see your own role in the problem. But it's painful because enlightenment involves what the Buddha called the great death. And there's 4 great deaths, but this is the great death in relationship problems. The moment you see you're actually causing the problem you've been blaming the other person for, it can feel shameful, very painful. A lot of patients burst into tears when we use this tool together. It's a very powerful tool, and so there's 3 more steps on it. Step 3 is good versus bad communication. Step 4 is consequences, and step 5 is the revised version. How could you have responded more effectively? Now, we're going to do steps 3, 4, and 5. I didn't ask Sophia to do them. I probably should have asked her to, but
we can do it for her.
Yeah, we'll do it for her. The step 3 is you look at this thing I've created called the EAR checklist, EAR. EAR stands for empathy, assertiveness, and respect, the 3 components of good versus bad communication. And you look at your response and you say, was my empathy, was that good or bad communication? How did I do on empathy? How did I do on assertiveness or sharing my own feelings? And how did I do on conveying love and respect? Was it good or bad communication? So let's look at empathy first. In empathy, you acknowledge the other person's feelings. And she mentioned that she thought he had 21 feelings,
right?
I think we said. And how many of them did she acknowledge?
No, well, she acknowledged 0 of them, actually.
Yeah, so and it's painful. You don't want to hurt a person's feelings,
right?
But she certainly, and when she says her husband has trouble acknowledging emotions, see, it looks like she's the one.
Yeah.
And often we have exactly the thing we're blaming the other person with.
Well, that is so interesting. Yep.
See in yourself. So there she'd have to tick off bad communication rather than good communication for empathy. Now, A equals assertiveness. That's the second component. You share your own feelings in a kindly way, a respectful way, with an I feel statement like I'm feeling sad right now, or I'm feeling disappointed or concerned, or whatever it is. And I think we said she had 12 or 14 feelings. Did she share any of her feelings?
No, she didn't.
Yeah. See, she said, do you feel worse than you did last week? Did something happen? I read a self-help blog, and see, she's in this kind of helping, fixing mode. By the way, when you try to help someone or fix someone, what message do you convey to them?
Well, that you're flawed and I have all the answers.
Yeah. So so we'd have to give her a bad communication on I feel statements and assertiveness. And again, I don't want to hurt your feelings, Sophia, if you're listening, and I'm very admiring your courage to bring this example. And we all do these things, but there is no acknowledgement of your own emotions either. And you had many strong emotions at that moment. And then would we say that that's a love, from R equals respect? Is that a loving communication? Is she conveying love and respect here?
No, not really, because she's not acknowledging his feelings. She's not talking about her feelings. So, no.
She's just trying
to fix him.
Fix this broken person.
Yeah, which sounds really annoying, actually.
Yeah. And again, I don't mean to throw stones at you, because I've made this same error often myself, forgetting to empathize and just try to fix someone who says they're upset. And occasionally you can get away with it, but more often than not, it leads to a kind of a impasse in the interaction,
right?
Which is what's happening
yep.
with her. And so when I'm working with patients with this, I say, was this easy for you or difficult to do this step 3? And usually they say it's really hard for them because it's just a shock to the system when you look at yourself rather than blaming the other person. And of course, mystics through the ages have said, look inward, you'll find the answer. And I never knew what that meant. Are you supposed to go into a mountain cave and sit and stare at your navel and find some meaningful answer about the meaning of the universe and get enlightened? It never made sense. But now with the relationship journal, it makes perfect sense to examine yourself.
But I can imagine it would be so painful for Sophia to acknowledge, because she's trying to help her husband. She obviously loves her husband, and she's looking at this and saying, wow, I really failed in my communication.
Yep, absolutely. And some people don't want this because they want to maintain that I'm superior, you're to blame. They don't want to look at themselves, and it's sad. And in my clinical experience, I would say 3/4 of the time, and some of my colleagues have the same experience, patients will suddenly change their mind once they get to this point in the relationship journal, and they see this is about changing yourself, not blaming the other person. They want out. They don't want to.
They don't want to face it.
Yeah, they don't want enlightenment. They don't want to look at themselves. It's very, very
I think
painful.
it's that role of accountability and free will. It comes to play here.
Yeah. And the recovery from depression does not involve pain too much. You go from misery to euphoria, and most people like that. You find out you're not a loser, you're a lot better than what you thought. This is the opposite. You thought you were so great and that your husband was screwed up, and I'm sure her husband does have issues. We all do. But when you have to look at yourself and see that you're actually not as good as you thought, and you're actually causing these difficulties. And this is to me the worst of the 4 deaths of the ego. When I do this, it's very painful for me.
Yeah.
Now, consequences, this is step 4. And the question is, did your response in step 2, and Sophia, when you respond to your husband, does that make the problem better or worse? What are the consequences of interacting with your husband like that? What will he do? What will happen next? What will he conclude?
Well, I can imagine that it would, the consequence would be the problem continues. There's no healing. There's no repair. There's no movement forward to a healthier way of communicating, and she's going to continue to complain that he won't talk about his feelings, and they're not close to each other.
Yeah. See, he's trying to talk about his feelings. I don't know why I've been feeling depressed today, and then instead of rewarding him by acknowledging his feelings and encourage him to tell her more, which would feel in a very loving way.
Which is what she wants.
Yeah, she ignores his feelings and tries to fix him.
Right.
And so he'll feel punished for trying to express his feelings. And so now we can answer the question, why does Sophia's husband have trouble dealing with feelings and expressing his feelings? Is it because he has Asperger's? No. What is the reason?
Because he's being shut down. He's not being heard.
Yeah, and this is even worse than step 3. This is the full-blown enlightenment step when you see that you're creating your own interpersonal reality. But on the other hand, the good side of it is that you can stop doing that and respond more skillfully using the 5 secrets of effective communication. Now that you're dead, the death of your ego in step 4, if you can tolerate that, in step 5, you go to heaven. And you use the 5 secrets to experience that loving relationship that you've been yearning for. And so certainly we want to give Sophia and anyone who has the courage to do this, give her a nice reward. And so how would she use the 5 secrets to respond to him? You want to take a shot at it? When he's saying, I don't really know why I'm feeling so depressed today.
Sure. Well, maybe she could start off by saying, let's call him Dave. Dave, I have noticed that you've been feeling depressed, and I feel so sad about that. I am worried about you and really concerned about what's been going on with you. And I'd really love to hear more about your depression. Can you tell me more about it? You're the most important thing in the world to me, and I want to hear everything you have to say about what the depression has been like for you.
Yeah, I'd have to give you an A or an A plus on that. I thought.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, it is very, very simple. These things sound simple, but they're hard to do in reality because we're so addicted to our dysfunctional way of communicating and relating to that person. But she says, I've noticed and feel so sad. So that's an I feel statement. And it also is stroking. There's, the 5 secrets. I'll post them with the show notes, but there's the 3 listening skills: disarming, thought and feeling, empathy, and inquiry. There's the assertiveness skill, which is I feel statements. And then there's stroking, which is respect, which is stroking, saying something positive to the other person.
Uh-huh.
Oh, okay. So, they're right on the pad, so it's less background noise. In fact, I can put it here. I just got a little note from Rhonda that my writing was noisy. And so you say, I'm worried and concerned. It's again, showing your feelings. Tell me more about how you're feeling. Which is inquiry. You're the most important thing in the world to me. Which is, loving and stroking. Now, another thing you can do is called multiple choice empathy, if you like, is, especially if you think the other person may have a little trouble expressing feelings, you can give them kind of a multiple choice list. I wonder, and she has some things here she could choose from. She could say, I'm wondering too, if you're feeling, nervous or maybe you're feeling pretty unhappy or kind of inadequate or unloved and rejected maybe by me or abandoned, or maybe you're feeling humiliated or discouraged, or maybe even a bit angry and annoyed. Do any of these ring a bell? I'd love to hear more about it. And that's one of the more advanced techniques, multiple choice empathy.
It also sounds like feeling empathy.
Yeah. That's right. It's just a nice way of doing the feeling empathy. So that's about it. And then that's all she has to do. She doesn't have to try to fix her husband. It's just to me, the meaning of intimacy is the capacity of 2 people to talk about difficult feelings in a respectful way, and that this will bring them a lot closer together. Now, it's not her job to cure his depression. It might do a great deal to lift his mood, probably would. But there's more things, he could do if he's still depressed. He could get treatment. He could read my book, Feeling Good, the New Mood Therapy. 2/3 of the people who read it, according to research studies, it lifts their mood a great deal.
But it doesn't even sound like her goal is to help or fix him. Really, in the long run, when she sent you that email, her goal was, how do I get closer to my husband?
Yeah, and that's right, and that's a beautiful thing to do. That's really all she has to do. And then she sent me a little follow-up note, she says, by way of a bit more context, when she sent me this example, communication between me and my husband is really poor. I'm pretty miserable, and I suspect my husband is too. We don't argue. We just hope difficult issues will disappear. We can spend several days not really even speaking. There's quite a tense atmosphere at our home, so this would be the solution to that. And then I love this thing that she wrote. Also, I looked at part 5 of Feeling Good Together, and I think most of the mistakes you describe in those chapters apply to me.
Wow.
Particularly helping. I'm doing helping and problem solving, and I also have anger and conflict phobia. I'm in for a tough lesson. Many thanks for your continued interest in my situation. And I have to say, Sophia, I just loved that statement, and I would say the prognosis for you is pretty close to 110%.
That's really positive. That's so great.
We're trying to demonstrate fractal psychotherapy, and we just applied one of your very powerful methods to one specific really short event. I mean, in real life, that exchange took probably all of 15 seconds.
Yeah.
And now we need to really tell our listeners, okay, great. So we've helped that woman to give a response that is empathetic and warm to her husband. How is she going to generalize that to the rest of her relationship?
And Rhonda will give us a great answer to that.
She is going to generalize this to the rest of her relationship because she's going to understand that in order for her husband to stop complaining, which is what she's complaining about, that she needs to allow the death of her own self and change and be learn more about the 5 secrets, learn more about how to listen to him fully with her heart and provide empathy and describe how much he means to her and her own feelings, and elicit more and more communication from him so that he can fully be heard by her.
Yeah, share her feelings and acknowledge his feelings so they'll have a closer, loving relationship. So
essentially what we're doing here is we take that event as a case study.
Yeah.
And just like any case study, a case study allows us to delve deeply into one specific event or such situation. And through that, we find out all the places where we are perpetuating the situation.
Exactly. And she will never have a problem with her husband that's different from the one on this relationship journal. That's all she wrote. If she's willing to solve this problem, she'll have the solution to all of the problems in her marriage and her relationship. And it's not her job to treat his depression. It's her job to respond to him in a loving, caring, supportive way.
Thank you, everybody. And before we sign off, just a commercial message. The Habits and Addictions workshop, which was on February 10th on Sunday, was a huge success. We had a biggest enrollment, including the helpers and stuff. We were at 173 people, and the recent workshops have been like about hoping for 90 was considered huge. We almost doubled that. And so thank you for your enthusiastic support. It was just a huge hit. When I work with Jill, it's hard to go wrong. She's just a master teacher and a wonderful human being. And she and I are going to work again together on May 19th for anxiety disorder, step-by-step training for therapists. If you go to my website, feelinggood.com, you'll find the information and the link for registration. And I would move fast because we've already got something like 40 or 50 people registered, and the in-person sells out really, really fast. And we had to turn some people away from the habits and addictions one because we have to have helpers online to provide a good small group feedback for the people who join us online. But we hope you can join us then. May 19th, and then also this summer on my website you'll see the 2 intensives, one in Calgary, Canada in the middle of July, and one starting on July 29th, the annual one at the South San Francisco Conference Center. So hope you can join us in one of the upcoming programs. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you for that, David. And join us again for another episode of the Feeling Good podcast next time.
Thanks, Fabrice. Thanks, Rhonda.
Thank you. It was such an honor to be a part of it.
This has been another episode of the Feeling Good podcast. For more information, visit Dr. Burns' website at feelinggood.com, where you will find the show notes for this podcast under the blog page, and where you can leave your comments and questions. The website has an abundance of resources for therapists as well as non-therapists, including books, workshops, a list of online training groups around the world, and much more. Theme music is Gypsy Jazz in Paris, 1935, composed and performed by Brett Van Donsel. I am your host, Fabrice Nye, and I invite you to join us next time for another episode of the Feeling Good podcast.